Hey guys, it's Mrs. Marple again. We are going to be working on a landscape today. We're going to be introduced to a new artist. Her name is Aryani, and this is an example of her work right here, and she makes beautiful, simple landscapes of where she lives up in Maryland. And so we've got some really pretty mountainscapes here, considered a landscape, right? Anything outside would be considered a landscape. So we're going to be working on a few different things here. The most important thing is going to be the vocabulary that goes along with learning how to draw a landscape. There's lots of different parts to it, but we're going to make it really easy. So this is another example of her work over here. Let me show you. There it is. So this one has a couple of different colors. You can do warm colors or cool colors in your sky if you like, and then you can add some fun stars and things like that. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do this. She likes to use geometric shapes for her, where's her name? For her frame, and so you could pick a square, a rectangle, an oval, a circle, those shapes that can be drawn perfectly, hexagons if you want to, octagon, any of those geometric shapes to start as your frame, and then you create the landscape on the inside of that, on the positive space of that, and then the negative space is the outside edge, right here. So positive is inside, negative is the space around. Okay. So you can see here a couple of different versions of this. This is an activity that you can use colored pencil, watercolors, acrylic, regular markers, just crayons. You can use chalk if you want to out on your driveway. There's a lot of different ways to make this because really the only color you're going to need is for the sky. The ground and the trees and everything below the horizon line is going to just be black and white. So I hope you guys are excited. I am. I'm going to show you on the board and then I'm going to show you a paper version as well. All right, let's get started. Okay guys, sorry about my board, it's just a little bit dirty here. I've been working on the same assignment with my friends in 3rd grade here at school, and this is a good example of it. I used watercolor paper for this one, but I'm going to show you an example on the board here that you can just do with paper and pen or paper and pencil, things like that. I would recommend, if you're going to do a painted version, to use Sharpie. So that whenever you paint the sky, your water-soluble markers, they won't run around on your paper. You can also use oil pastel or a black crayon. That would work well too. So the first thing you want to do is come up with a geometric shape for your frame, okay? And I've got some of those geometric shapes right over here on the wall. So you could do something as complicated as a star if you wanted to. You could do square, oval, diamond, pentagon, hexagon, rectangle, heart, circle, and triangle. Those are my geometric shapes for you guys today. You can pick any of those. You can also use whatever you have around the house to trace. So you could find the bottom or top of a bowl. You could find your notebook to trace around for your rectangle. There's so many different options. If you don't have a ruler to make nice straight lines or curved lines, just trace something. So I'm just going to kind of freehand this. I'm going to do a rectangle on this one. Okay. So there's my frame, and I know that I'm going to be doing things on the inside of this, but there is still room on the outside. So with my red, I'm going to draw maybe the size of the paper. Probably would have been a good thing to do first. Oops. And Aryani creates her own little pieces of artwork. Sometimes they're only this big, and sometimes they're a little bit bigger. But I'm going to draw big so you can see better. Okay, so inside of this black rectangle here, this is going to be my space for my landscape. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the horizon line. The horizon line is where the sky and the ground meet, okay? So this is going to be the tallest part of our picture before it gets to the sky, and that's going to be the mountains. So what I want you to do is I want you to go at least halfway up your paper. You can go higher if you want to. Inside of your shape, actually. Inside of your shape, go up halfway. And I want you to start drawing me in a regular zigzag line. So this is an organic line, which means it's not perfect, okay? I wouldn't be drawing like shark teeth. Like, this is not how mountains truly look, is it? They're a little bit more unusual and special. So come up with a special organic line to draw up and across from one area of your shape to the other. It's touching completely across. Okay. Now you can always pause this if you want to take some time on your mountain line because you might want to erase if you're using pencil first. But really, if you make a mistake on this, it's okay. There's no perfect mountain shape. So that's what's good about drawing organic things like a landscape. All right, So after we draw our mountain range, we're going to go down here about halfway between the top of our mountains and the rest of our shape. And now I'm going to draw another line. Now this is going to be the ground underneath the mountain. So I'm going to draw lightly across there. If I had pencil, I would want to draw light always so I could erase. And then I'm going to do a curved line. I'm going to start from the right-hand side, and I'm going to draw over, and then almost like I'm drawing an S, I'm going to curve it, and then come back around, just like that. It gives the illusion of depth, like it looks like we can actually walk into our picture a little bit. Okay, so this would be a good place to stop if you needed to work on any of your lines or erasing, but I'm going to go ahead and keep going. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a little bit of value. You can see this example here. I drew some diagonal lines to help create the illusion of a shadow on one side of the mountain. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so you need to decide where your light source is going to be, and so you want to pick the left or the right-hand side for your sun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my sun be over here, shining. You don't have to draw this. This is just an example. And so I'm using a form of shading called hatching. Now there's a lot of different ways to show value in shading, but hatching is using one direction of line consistently to create a value, meaning a darker shade of color. All right, so we're going to use that value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from the top of my mountains, all the tops, slightly to the left. Boop. And they don't have to be perfect. And you don't actually even have to draw on all of them. Okay, so it looks like little lines that are coming down from the tippy tops of those triangle edges. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to those valley areas, the low parts of the mountain, and I'm going to draw an irregular line to connect. Okay? So there's a valley. I'm going to draw a crazy line and connect it. There's another valley here. They don't need to be perfect. You're just connecting those lines to something. They can go down really far, they can be really shallow. Okay. So it looks kind of strange right now, but it's going to look a lot better when you start adding the value, those diagonal lines. So you need to decide which direction you want them to go, because you don't want to do multiple directions of lines where they cross over each other. That's called cross-hatching. And Aryani really enjoys doing the hatching, and she uses a fine felt pen to do this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the slope of the mountain diagonal this way. And I want to try to keep the thickness of my line consistent. And the closer you put these lines together, the darker the value. Here we go. So I'm going to do this throughout on my mountains. And this is a good place to stop and pause if you need to. Okay. So now I have the value on my mountains. They look a little bit more three-dimensional. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create some more texture on my mountains. I can tell that they're 3D because they have different sides to them where the shadow gets to, the sun can't reach all sides of it right now. But I'm going to draw some extra lines for texture because mountains are not smooth, are they? They've got rocks under there. So you can use some segmented lines. You can use some dots if you want to create just a different kind of surface for your mountain. No wrong answer on this, as much texture as you want. Okay, so after you get your mountain range, the next thing we're going to work on is our middle ground and our foreground. There's three different parts to a landscape. This up here is called the background, okay? This little mountain range would be considered my background. The middle ground is going to be the middle of my paper, and then there's something called the foreground, which is in the front of my paper. So it goes in distance. Foreground's in the front, middle ground's in the middle, background's in the back. So we're going to go to the middle ground. And in the middle ground, I want to draw a line of trees because there's going to be a little forest before you can get to my mountain here, which is often a lot of trees that go right along the edges of the mountains. So I'm going to start with a really small vertical line right here on the horizon line under my mountain. So the line where the mountain connects to the land. So just some straight vertical lines. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create almost a point at the very top little arrow. And this is what it looks like. I'm gonna draw in the sky, don't draw in your sky. This is what it looks like if you were to zoom in, okay? So now I'm gonna draw lines underneath it that get bigger. So it looks like a tree. Okay, see how I did that? Looks like a tree is floating over my mountain range right now. So you're gonna do this on these short little trees here. Erase that guy. Okay, so now I have 3 little tree friends in my background, middle ground area. Okay, those are the furthest away. Now when things get smaller, the further away they get, that's called foreshortening. Kind of like foreground, foreshortening. They're getting shorter as they get further away, right? They're not just baby trees. They're far away. They're full-size trees. You just can't see them as well. Okay, so now let's go to our middle ground. And I want you to draw a medium-sized line. And it can even go past that line where your trees are because this is a different area of our landscape. And you're gonna do the same thing. Start with an arrow and then add lines that get longer towards the bottom. Little pine tree, little evergreen tree. Okay, let's draw another one over here. So medium-sized line. It's gotta be bigger than my trees at the mountain's base, the bottom of that. Okay, so I've got 2 middle ground trees. Now I'm gonna draw a big tree for the foreground. That's the very, very front. So draw a big line. It can go all the way down to the end of that shape if you wanted to. Same thing, arrow. Really this is repetition. We're creating the same shape over and over again, and each time you do it, you should get a little bit better at it. Using a lot of elements of art, we're using line, shape, form. We're using value. We're gonna be using color later. Space, because we're going into our picture. You can use your imagination like you're walking through it. Okay, so we have our foreground, our middle ground, and our background. We have trees in all planes. And if you wanted to go back in and add some even smaller trees, you can do that. You can draw some little tiny trees that you can just barely see. And the more trees you add, completely up to you. You could also add things like Aryani adds in hers. You can add a tent, you can add a cabin, you can add deer, or you could turn this into a pond if you wanted to. It's really just completely up to you. So at this point, what you would do is if you did it in pencil, you'd want to go over it in something dark, like a black marker or a Sharpie or an oil pastel or crayon, before you start working on the sky. Now, if you do not have watercolors or paints, what I recommend is picking either warm or cool colors. Cool colors are the ones that make you think cool thoughts, like ice cubes and freezing temperatures and things like that. So blue, purple, and green. I did not add green in this example, but you definitely could because it is a cool color and make it look a little bit more like the Northern Lights if you wanted to. And I actually added salt to my watercolor paper to create that starburst effect. But if you don't have watercolors and salt, don't worry about that. That's just what we're doing in the classroom here. And this is the warm colors. So they're both beautiful. If you wanted to try rainbow, you could, but what happens when you mix the cool colors and the warm colors together is it makes them kind of muddy and turn brown. So if you just have crayons, you don't have to worry about them mixing up. You can do whatever you want up in your sky, and I can't wait to see them. I will do a quick version of this wet on wet for you in a second video, so if you're interested in that, you can watch it. If not, color your sky however you like, but leave everything below the horizon line black and white. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Okay, guys, so we are back at the table. I've drawn a really quick version of a Aryani landscape. It's a little bit, it's a different shape. I decided to find a geometric shaped frame, and I decided to lay it down and trace that. I thought the shape was really nice, and so I'm happy with that. What you're gonna need to create your watercolor background, if that is something that you're wanting to do and something that you have the supplies for at home, I actually drew this on a watercolor paper. It's really cheap watercolor paper. You can find this at Walmart usually. a set of watercolors, or you could use markers on watercolor paper and then just put water over it. A brush and then some water, and our secret ingredient today is salt. So what we're going to do first is we are going to be using a technique called wet on wet. This is just for the watercolor people, not for marker people. You don't want to ruin your markers. So I'm going to put water first. It's the first step to creating this really fun sky like Jen Aryani, and she does use the wet on wet technique. Now, you want to be really careful not to get it on your mountains, and my third graders even, they did not draw the details of their mountains yet, just in case their water kind of moved someplace else, because anywhere where you have this water, your paint is going to spread. So if you make a mistake and get it all over your mountain range, or you paint too much, you would want to wait for your whole paper to dry before you move on, because you have no control over where the color is going to go if you have wetted the entire area. So I have wetted, I put water down on my mountain landscape sky only. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my colors. Now I'm going to stick with either warm or cool colors, and I think I'm going to stick with the cool colors. Those are green, blue, and purple, and I'm going to go heavy on the green because I didn't use green at all in my last color, in my last example. So I have to wake up my paint, meaning I have to add water to it to make it work. So I put water in my brush, and then I move it around in circles in my tray. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply color in different areas of my picture. Now because I've already wet my paper, it's going to spread in really organic and fluid ways because I've put that layer of water first, and I really like the way that looks. You can paint lines, you can do dots in the sky if you want to. It's really up to you. But because we're working on wet paper, I'll want to work a little bit more quickly. And I'm still changing, I'm still rinsing out my brush between colors, but if you have your own paint set at home and you can clean it out afterwards, you can mix. But you can always just dot the color on top to make a mix on their own too. And I do want to paint right around my mountain so I can make sure that color gets down there. But you're going to use these cool colors or warm colors to fill in your sky. And when we're done painting with the colors, oh, that's the best part. We're going to be using the salt to create a reaction with our wet watercolor that looks like stars. A little more blue over here. So all those cool colors are going to be mixing a little bit. Now because green and purple are both secondary colors, ideally we would want them to stay apart so they don't muddy to make a brown, but I'm okay with it if they mix just a little bit in this picture. Okay, so I have my sky painted, and now the next part is our salt. So this is salt I grabbed from the science lab. It's a great way of recycling, because otherwise the salt would be thrown away because it's no longer food safe. So, look at all that. I do not need this much salt. Okay, so it might be good to have a grown-up help you decide how much salt you need, because you're only going to need a tiny little bit. You can use regular table salt or whatever you have. So, you know, it might be interesting to try the coarse salt too if you've got like that Himalayan salt. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle it while my picture is still wet. That's the trick. It's got to still be wet with water. So you can add a tiny bit of the salt, and I've got some kids that went crazy with the salt and put a whole bunch on there. And what that's going to do is when it dries, you're going to be able to see the full results. You'll want to put this someplace out of the way so it won't drip and it won't get on anything, but you also don't want to try to paint over the top of your salt layer because it'll affect the outcome of your reaction that it has. And I'll put some pictures of student examples in the example template, but I think you can already see that it's looking pretty cool, and I like it. And when this is dry, you can either dust off the salt or you can leave it for an extra element of texture on your pictures. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this simple watercolor experiment with the salt. And like I said, if you watch this but you don't have watercolor paint, it's a great idea for later when you do get a chance to use watercolors, that you can always try this wet on wet with the salt reaction technique on your other projects. All right, bye guys.